So a weird thing happened today. I was getting ready to talk about what Joe Casey had to say about his Weapon X-Men series and what happened to it and how basically the title was stolen and put on another book that had nothing to do with his book. And it was going to involve talking about Sarah Brundstad, the editor of that book, who was the one that basically swiped his title for his book. And then I found out that Sarah had actually quit or fired. I'm not really sure. No longer working at Marvel Comics as of this week. So let's talk about Sarah Brundstad, and then obviously we'll get to the Joe Casey Weapon X-Men title swap that happened, which is just another one of the things that Sarah Brundstad did during her time, whatever. Her time at Marvel Comics. Sarah Brundstad is the worst editor at Marvel Comics, has been for quite some time. If all of a sudden you realize, like, whoa, all the X-Men feel like they're just LGBTQ like analogs. It's only gay comic books. It's queer fanfic, as I put it. That's a lot to do with Sarah Brundstad. That's the only reason she was at Marvel. She doesn't like comic books. She's not particularly interested in any of the characters, doesn't know any of their history. She was literally just at Marvel Comics to introduce new LGBTQ characters and try to push new LGBTQ creators to the forefront. A lot of times, Doc and I will talk about a comic book for Worst of the Week, and I'll say, this feels like a Sarah Brundstad comic book, i.e., it feels like somebody that doesn't know how to write comic books being edited by someone that doesn't give a fuck about comic books. This is a good thing to happen with Marvel. I don't know that they fired her. If she just decided to leave on her own accord, best of luck in your future endeavors. Marvel Comics became a better place as of Monday. Sarah Brundstad stated on Instagram, Monday was my last day at Marvel Comics. All told, it was 13 foundational years, and I am so grateful and so honored. So as of Monday, the very worst editor in all of comic books, even worse, I would say, than Heather Antos, certainly more destructive than Heather Antos, Sarah Brundstad is out the door because she came into Marvel Comics with a complete agenda. A lot of that came out during interviews. There's specifically one interview with Geeks Out, which I guess is like an LGBTQ geek sphere type of website where they talk to people in comics, but probably other geek sphere type stuff about what they're doing and how they're uplifting marginalized voices and all that kind of stuff you would expect out of a website like this. This is one of the things that Sarah Brundstad had to say. I definitely went in with the intention of bringing more trans representation to the Marvel Universe and was beyond thrilled when Charlie Jane Anders agreed to it. It's something I've wanted to do with her in particular for a long time. Charlie Jane Anders, who had never written a comic book in their life before doing like a Marvel Voices Pride little short story with the introduction of Escapade, and then did, what was it, New Mutants Lethal Legion. If you've ever read that comic book, you'll know why Charlie Jane Anders never should have been hired in the first place. Clearly had never read a comic book in their life. And this is something that Sarah Brundstad really wanted to do, something that she worked on, I believe, for 5 years. There's another interview out there with Charlie Jane Anders, I believe, on Adventures in Poor Taste, when they said, how did you get this gig? Why are you writing a New Mutants book? Not, oh, I've always loved the X-Men. Oh, I've been a huge fan of the New Mutants. I had this story to tell for so long. I've been champing at the bit to get to tell this story. Never the case when you talk to these creators that were brought in under Sarah Brundstad. The story was, Sarah Brundstad contacted me out of the blue. We've been working on this for a few years. I finally decided to take the money. Never had an interest in Marvel Comics, and you could see it in New Mutants Lethal Legion. And Sarah Brundstad went out of her way to hire as many, specifically lesbians, but certainly gay men as well, as humanly possible, whether or not they could write or draw. And that was an enormous hindrance to Marvel Comics, but that was the complete and 100% agenda of Sarah Brundstad, which you can see with her own words, but also the way that people describe interacting with her and getting hired at Marvel Comics. This has been a plague on Marvel Comics for a very long time. Went out of her way to hire as many incompetent people as possible, as long as who they were fucking was very, very important to her. And that was the number one factor in getting hired at Marvel Comics on a book edited by Sarah Brundstad. Thank goodness she's actually gone at this point, but we have some more information from that interview with Geeks Out. Every year that we create new queer characters, our world gets bigger and more diverse, and we are celebrating the sheer diversity of talent in comics in an explicit way for the first time. I'm extremely proud that so many of the people who got their start in a Voices comic have gone on to do more work for Marvel. Rebecca Roanhorse, David Cutler, Chris Allen, Maria Wolf, Eleonora Carlini. I could keep going. Seriously, we have made such a huge impact in just a couple of years. Our talent pool looks way different now. That's the major outcome for me personally, because she went in there with a personal mandate to change who was allowed to work with Marvel Comics. And it all depended on if you fell into the LGBTQ spectrum or whatever. It's absolutely insane that Marvel let this person have hiring ability for several years, knowing they had to know this, that she only cared about who the people she was hiring were fucking. What's happened at Marvel Comics over the last, 10 years, 5 years, whatever you want to time frame it? Far less people that are competent in writing comic books, far less people that actually like comic books. No heroes being elevated. A lot of new LGBTQ characters being created, none of them actually sticking because you actually forgot to hire people that would know how to create compelling characters, regardless of who the character is supposed to be screwing in the comic book. And there's a legacy of failure and destruction at the hands of Sarah Brundstad at Marvel Comics. This is somebody that didn't read comic books growing up, and I'm cool with that because obviously I didn't read comic books growing up. I didn't start reading until my 30s. There's nothing wrong with not reading comic books when you're growing up. But this is her perspective, Sarah Brunstad's perspective, her own words regarding the history of comic books and her place in it. I love comics because they're weird. They've existed on the fringes of the publishing and artistic community for a long time. It's only been 14 years since the first Marvel Studios Iron Man film, and it's hard to remember now that before that, basically no one knew who Iron Man was. I think queer people have always made comics in our own little corners, but I'm really happy to see us taking the mainstream now too. There for the taking. She's there to take mainstream comics and make them queer fanfic, something that we've been talking about on the channel for some time now. This was her mandate. Didn't even realize Iron Man existed until the fucking movie came out. I wasn't a comic book reader. I know who fucking Iron Man is. It's not like they didn't exist before then, and that's why you get this type of perspective. Ooh, we're breaking glass ceilings. We got a trans character the first time. No, you don't. There's trans characters all the way back in the 80s. You don't have the first gay character. That happened a long time ago. That's not the first female artist. There was a female artist in that book in the 40s. And these people have no sense of history or appreciation about what came before them because she's not here for that. She never liked Iron Man. She never liked the X-Men. She doesn't like the Avengers. She doesn't like Marvel Comics. She likes queer comics in her own little corner and wants to make that the de facto mainstream. And that's why Marvel is in the place that they're in. They've driven off so many readers over the last 5-10 years, becoming this weird little LGBTQ niche comic book publisher when they're supposed to be doing mainstream comic books. I don't particularly give a flying fuck who my character is sleeping with, whether they be straight, gay, trans, whatever. None of that stuff really bothers me. But when it overtakes the book and the superheroics and the moral of the story takes a back fucking page for the LGBTQ message, that's when I've had enough. And I've had enough for a very long time. Sarah Brundstad has been an enormous part of that by her own voice. Didn't realize that Iron Man existed until the fucking movie came out. Now, I mentioned Joe Casey earlier on in the video because that's where I was going to make this video before I even learned that she was no longer working in Marvel Comics. This is a story he had. We've talked about it with Doc a little bit when we were talking about the announcement for Weapon X-Men, which sounds like a whole lot of fun. It's going to be part of One World Under Doom. Unfortunately, it should be its own miniseries. Joe Casey had come up with this concept. He had brought it up and pitched it to Jordan White, who was the group editor at X-Men at the time. Jordan White loved it. He took the pitch back to Marvel, submitted it to CB Cebulski. CB Cebulski loved it, and they decided they were going to greenlight it. They were going to go forward with it. All of a sudden, Dan Buckley steps in, essentially removes Jordan White as the group editor of X-Men, puts Tom Revort in there, and they're in a state of limbo. And then Joe Casey explains on his Substack, which you should be subscribing to because it's a great Substack, about what happens next. Absolutely insane right here. Cut to about 2 months later, I received an email out of the blue from Jordan White, still serving out his term now as a lame duck X-Men editor. Very matter-of-factly, he let me know that Marvel was about to announce a brand new series called Weapon X-Men. Not the same series I had pitched, of course. Jordan preemptively assured me that this was an entirely different idea in language that, to me, kind of smacked of corporate ass covering. So I did what any borderline sane professional comic book writer would do and got in touch with Tom Revort right away to find out what happened. The long and short of it is as follows. The miniseries in question had a different title originally. Tom wanted that title as part of his upcoming relaunch and informed the editor involved that they should simply find a new title for the miniseries. Without Tom's knowledge or Jordan White's, for all I know, the Weapon X-Men title was lifted from my pitch and haphazardly slapped on in the miniseries. Even the writer of said miniseries, an amazingly stand-up guy by the way, didn't even know what had happened or where the title had originally come from. And who is the editor on Weapon X-Men from Christos Gage with a really stupid idea so we could showcase the most powerful Logan in the history of X-Men and Wolverine? Of course, it's a female version. Sarah fucking Brundstad went out there to a comic book veteran that has more cachet to his name than Sarah Brundstad could ever wish for, and stole his fucking title and slapped it on some stupid idea that she'd come up with and hired Christos Gage to kind of crap out. Christos Gage would never come up with a concept as stupid as that fucking Weapon X-Men book. And she went out there and stole the title. And the idea that Jordan White didn't know about it is completely ludicrous and ridiculous. Tom Brevoort went out there and said, hey, you have to change that title because I'm going to be using that for the relaunch of From the Ashes. Jordan White was like, well, there's this Weapon X-Men book. I think the pitch has moved on to Tom, but they're not going to do that. Let's just steal his title, and gave her the green light to do it. Can you believe that? That is what I can't even get into the Jordan White of it all. That would be another full-on conversation, but that's who Sarah Brundstad is. Came into Marvel Comics with an agenda. We got to have more trans representation. Let's hire somebody that doesn't know how to write comic books. We're going to create more queer characters than you can fucking imagine. Think about this. Somnus, the Sleep Raper, was created under Sarah Brunstad's eye. The debut happened as she was the editor. She thought a character that literally put men to sleep and raped them while they were sleeping was a heroic character. That's the Sarah Brunstad of it all. Wants to transform mainstream comic books into LGBTQ fanfic comic books, which has been happening across the board for some time at Marvel Comics. Was she fired? I'm not really sure. Will we find out? I don't fucking care at this point. I'm just glad Sarah Brunstad is gone from Marvel Comics. She's been a stain on the industry. Hopefully, maybe, just maybe, some of these comic books at Marvel can get back to a semblance of actually being decent at this point, because they are getting rid of the very worst comic book editor in the entire fucking industry that had the worst Rolodex in the history of comic books themselves, even worse than Heather fucking Ontos. More destructive than Heather Ontos, in my opinion. If you appreciate what I'm doing here on Thinking Critical YouTube, shining a spotlight on something I don't think a lot of people were even aware was happening, I'm sure they noticed it was happening, but they probably didn't know why it was happening, i.e. Sarah Brunstad and her mission at Marvel Comics to ruin the entire publisher, now gone. And you would like all that kind of coverage and more. The best place to support me and our mission on Think Critical YouTube is on the Patreon. There's a link in the video description. Lots of awesome podcasts going on there. And I will let you know on Christmas week, as long as you are a member of the Think Critical Patreon, you don't have to be a paid member. You will be getting everything for free the entire week of Christmas as well. That's going to be some fun.